My father liked gadgets. Whether it was the kitchen or in his office or wherever, he always had gadgets. Gadgets. Once he came home with a tape recorder. It was about that big. It was taupe on the sides, dark blue on top and below. And there were reels, 7-inch reels, 2 of them. And there was a really thin tape that was spun around this reel that would go through the heads and go to the other side. And as it did that, it could record what you said or music that was playing or take information and allow you to play back whatever it heard later. And you could speak to it and it would remember exactly what it was and send it back and bring out through the loudspeakers whenever you wanted. I remember needing to spend 1-2 hours recording things for my grandparents that lived in Holland. And we would do things, do stories, have arguments, whatever it was. Well, the whole hour was 2 hours, which for a little kid was a long time. And what we were able to do with this tape recorder thing was move that across that distance and communicate in a different way than an expensive telephone. I didn't quite like it all that much, although when we got one of those tapes back, it was great because little goodies came there, and for a little kid, that was really nice. And I remember the little goodies. A little while longer, I somehow managed to get my dad to allow me to take that to school. And I got taken to school by car, not by bike or walking, because this thing was heavy. And I carried it into the school, went back for my books, and everybody was excited. They wanted to talk, they wanted to shout, they wanted to have conversations, they wanted to act and do crazy things with this technology tape recorder that was heavy. And the little kids were enjoying this, and they had different ideas and used this thing for all sorts of purposes. And then we hatched a plan. You see, one of the really stern teachers, Mr. Van Wyk, we were a little scared of him. He was out of his office and he said, well, look at the tape recorder. They've got this thing that you could remote control when it would work. And we took some wire, yes, that worked. And we started recording some noises, some speaking and things like that, and put it at the back of the classroom when he wasn't there. Took the cord, plugged it in, moved it through the windows and out of his room so that we could enable it by making the 2 wires touch each other. We waited quite a while, and he came back, and we couldn't wait very long, so we just did it right away because we didn't have patience, and we should have waited, but we didn't. And he heard the noise, and he looked up, looked around, didn't know what was going on. After all, tape recorders, phones, iPods, they didn't exist. So he started walking there a little gingerly, and around this time we realized, we're going to get caught, we're going to get into trouble, we better run away. And he did find the tape recorder, and he could figure out whose voices were on it, and yes, we got caught, but we didn't get into trouble. Because this new technology was different, but it had uses and it was positive. And whilst we weren't praised, we certainly didn't get into trouble. Sometime later, I wanted to start creating things, but there wasn't money for that. So I started collecting old radios and amplifiers and things and pulled these pieces into little cupboards and boxes I had, and there were vacuum tubes and capacitors and inductors and lumps of metal called transformers and all sorts of other stuff. But that stuff, when you put it together in the right way, could be an amplifier, could be a radio, could be a sensor, and that was useful. Sometime later, and this was part of that, I wanted to do a Dalek voice. A Dalek voice is from Doctor Who. You know that blue telephone booth that flies off and does stuff? Well, the monsters had Dalek voices. I want one of those. How do you do that? It had to be electronic because you couldn't talk like that. And I found out in Popular Electronics that that was a ring modulator. How do you do a ring modulator? Well, in time I found out, with a little bit of fiddling and quite a bit of time, I could do a Dalek voice from my old parts. And that was great and useful, and yeah, that got put away. But some years later, when we did a play at school, I brought that back to life because we needed a scary, unusual, unimaginable voice, and the Dalek voice lived again, using those old parts. I had a need for money because I liked these electronic things and stuff like that. And I came across the Science Festival, and they had massive prizes. So what could I do for a prize? Well, I'd sort of been messing around with radios and thinking about ham radio and stuff like that. And I had these parts, so I thought, well, what can I do? And I came across that Reuters and news organizations would transmit the news using telex on the radio, though, with little strange sounds. And you could separate those sounds if you built some stuff, but you'd need a telex machine. Where am I going to get a telex machine? I had a need, I had a purpose, but I had a piece missing. So off to the post office at City Center and walked in and asked, and there was a friend from high school and things like that. And for some or other reason, they had old telex machines that were being replaced, and they had to be gotten rid of. And through mysterious methods, this telex machine arrived at my home, got delivered, didn't cost me anything. I had a telex machine. Now, these are big, heavy machines, and they pump out characters, 30 characters per second, hammering them out so that you could hear and read what was going on. Took a long time. 30 characters per second? That's really slow. But by doing that and building some filters and soldering this and that, we sort of filtered out these tones on the radio and got rid of the noise and did all of that. And there I got the news. All of it, lots of it. And I got it first, long before the other people, because it didn't go through editors or anything like that. And I took that to the science fair and did that and was up all night because there was too much radio interference, but we got it to work. I didn't win first or second or third prize, but I got a special honorable mention. I don't know what that meant, but what I did know is that I got a check for $500, and that was a lot of money. With $500, I could buy a radio transmitter, which I did from Hamrad in Cape Town. And I had a radio transmitter. That was worth it. And yeah, the telex machine was no longer useful, and I moved on, and I was happy. Move forward a couple of years, a lot of years, and I had a business idea, and I was working for a company, and we were selling PCs, the very first IBM PCs that went out there. And people would walk around with floppy disks. They would be slow. They weren't that reliable. And what was happening in larger companies where I was selling these computers was that they needed to move the information. How could you do that? Well, you know that idea of putting pieces together and creating a success wave again? Well, I looked around and checked things out, and this was before the internet, and found Devon in Mountain View, California. And they had some boards and a Devon hard disk. Now, that hard disk, cost a lot of money, and it was 1 million times smaller than a fairly big hard disk you might buy at home, 5 megabytes. And with cards and putting it together just right, you could get different people to share this information quickly, reliably, and it worked, as long as everything was just right. So putting the pieces together here was hardware, computers, wires, and cards, and the Devon hard disk, plus technical knowledge. And that really made sense. My business prospered, and we sold to these different companies. And what also happened is there were PCs everywhere. But when you needed to show something, you had to drive across town or across the country. Otherwise, you couldn't see what was on the computer, and this was a need. And I traveled to the United States regularly to see what was happening, and I found a solution that really sounded promising. It was called PC Anywhere. And I brought some of those copies back, And we started working out, and it was really difficult. Most often it didn't work. You see, you relied on modems, and these were little boxes like that needed things to get plugged in and get going. And they'd make a noise you might recognize as, that boo, beep, and start doing. Not unlike a fax machine, right? But we got these pieces to work together and soldered the cable just right. There were 33 different ways to do it, and you could get it going. We had a solution. It could be valuable if it worked. So it made sense that we had all these pieces, and the product wasn't a solution. The product with the pieces reformulated and packaged with support was a solution. So we started selling a solution with a guarantee that we would come to your premises anywhere in Southern Africa and make it work. And that might mean a 2-hour plane ride to make it work at no cost. And that really allowed us to get a large market share, a larger market share than PC Anywhere had in the United States, because you put different pieces together to innovate and create something new. But then there are always downsides and problems, and our little problem was the weather office. The weather office had put one of these installations on top of Monte Sources. Well, that's the tallest mountain in Southern Africa. It wasn't in South Africa, it was next door in Swaziland. And they had a problem, and they said, "You've got this guarantee, you'll make it work no matter where it is." Well, we realized that could be a problem, but we thought we'd phone you. Fool that I was, I said, "We can do anything." Craig Watson was my top technical person, and Craig was also an adventurist and a nature person. So Craig drove 300 miles, climbed to the top of Monte Sources with a computer and a soldering iron strapped to his back. And yes, it worked. And that was a huge loss because of cost, and we shouldn't have done it. But we had the photographs, and the story went out there, and we ended up with 92% market share. Everybody standardized on this, even though it hadn't done that elsewhere, because it wasn't the product, it was the bundle of the pieces that made the difference. PC Anywhere was a tremendous solution, and my business across 20 years had many waves. Something was needed, put the pieces together, it would take hold, it would grow, but in time it would be done and disappear again. And we started realizing that we got these waves of innovation. And in fact, when you get a wave and something starts working, you've got to also recognize when it will no longer work. That you've got to think of the next wave that's happening. And in our global village, these waves are happening more often, more intensely than ever before. So we're being caught off guard. How does that happen? And we seem to have resolved that. Think about yourselves, and if you go back far enough, you had a rotary phone to phone someone. Then you had a radio phone in home because the cord couldn't get all around the house. Then you had a car phone to speak to someone. Then you had a flip phone, and it could make phone calls, and it fitted in your pocket. Later, we had a smartphone, another smartphone, a new advanced smartphone. And right now, we read in the press that, well, the next ones are coming from Samsung and Apple, and they're going to be totally different. But you and I should be saying, yeah, they'll be totally different in 2021. What will a cell phone look like? Because as sure as nuts, they're working on that cell phone for 2021. Now I ask you, where are you going for yourself? Where is your wave and sets of waves as you go forward for your family, for your business? What can you start doing and planning your success waves for 2022, 2021 for yourself? Can you create better waves for yourself and all others? Thank you.